So I went down onto my haunches, we call it leopard crawl, down on the ground, crawling to the aisle. And I ran out the back door of the church. I had to kick the doors open. And I thought I'll come in behind the attackers in the front of the church. I'll come in behind them at the door that they entered. And as I ran out the back of the church, and I was coming around the corner, the terrorists were already standing at the getaway car. So in a couple of seconds that I had to kick the doors open and run round, they already had left the church. And what I didn't realize at that time was that inside the church, with one of my two shots from way back, fourth row from the back of the church, I'd actually hit one of them on the hand. And so they knew there was fire coming from the congregation at them. And so they ran out, but they didn't drive away immediately. When I came running around the corner, one of them was standing at the back left door of the car, and he had his rifle, automatic rifle, on his hip, pointing up to the sky, and he was looking at the door they had come out of. And all I could think was that he was expecting me to come running out of that door because somebody was shooting at them, and he would have just loaded his rifle and blown me away. But by God's grace, I was behind them, and so I took another 3 shots at them, and they jumped in the car and drove off. And it was due to the blood from his hand where I hit him inside the church that got onto the car seats. And so through forensics, the police managed to trace him and arrest him, one of the 4.
Wow. Wow. Now, they were trying to go after a white church. They attacked this church because it was in a white area, but that congregation was 35 to 40% black, wasn't it?
That's correct. That's correct, David. Yes, it was a multiracial church. It appears that they were aiming to get a sort of a church that was completely white. And it seems like their homework wasn't done correctly, and there were many people injured that were non-whites, and so there were a lot of non-whites in the church, but that's the way it panned out for them. We also had Russian seamen that were inside the church, and they would sit during the beginning of the service when the singing was taking place. They would sit with us, and then they would go to a separate hall where they'd have an interpreted service or a sermon that would take place for them. And unfortunately, they were there when the attack also took place. One of them, Dmitry Makagon, had a grenade land in his lap and blew off 2 legs and an arm. And he's still alive and living in Cape Town today.
Really? Wow. Well, it certainly was God's providence that you were able to stop this with just a 38 and 5 shots. But you were the man that God used. Tell us how you came to carry a 38 with you to church.
David, a long time before that, I was traveling with a friend near a little town called Wellington outside of Cape Town. We were going through to his parents' farm, and I was driving a small little pickup, very small little vehicle. And all of a sudden, there were tires burning in the streets of the car, and that was the African National Congress, which was Nelson Mandela's political party. They were burning tires in the road, and as my car came to a standstill, they started throwing rocks and bricks at our vehicle and rocking the vehicle with these bricks that were smashing the windows and denting the vehicle. So that was what happened then, and after that, I made the decision to purchase a firearm, and the next time my life was threatened, to use it to protect myself and my family. But it was a long walk for me. I'm telling a quick story in a few minutes, but it was a long theological issue for me as a Christian, whether I could carry a firearm in civilian life and then use it to defend myself. I didn't.
Well, certainly looking back at this, I mean, in hindsight, we can see that you saved a lot of lives. I mean, with 58 people that were wounded and another 11 that were killed. And these guys said after they caught them that they'd been given instructions to throw petrol bombs, Molotov cocktails into the church. It would have been massive carnage if you hadn't fired back at them and they fled.
Many people said they were expecting them to actually walk up and down the aisles and just mow people down.
Yes.
And after the attack, I reached out to them with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and one of the unit commanders said to me, I knew all about the attack before it took place, And our greatest desire was that there wouldn't be a living soul afterwards.
Wow. Wow. And you stopped that by having a gun. As I said, we can see in retrospect, but talk to people who are pacifists, people who are Christian pacifists. Tell them about this journey that you took and how important it is, because we're looking at this right now. We're thinking about the political aspect of it. Every time we have a shooting in America, we have the president and those who want to take away our firearms. They will use this as an opportunity to try to do that. But I want you to talk to the people out there, maybe who are sitting on the sidelines, who are naively thinking that the government is going to protect them. Because how long did this whole thing take? It didn't take that long, did it?
No, David, it's probably a couple of seconds. You know, there was write-ups in the newspapers talking about it being minutes. It was all a couple of seconds. A grenade takes, 5 to 7 seconds to go off. And in that time, everything was finished and over and they were gone.
Yes.
So, and as I said, some people were expecting them to walk up and down the aisles. That never happened because one of them had been injured, shot at. And so they ran away.
And no matter how good the government is, the government would not have been able to help anyone there. And we've had honest sheriffs in America tell people in high crime cities like Detroit, look, we'll do what we can to stop these people and arrest them, but you need to get a firearm. You need to train yourself so that you're not a victim. And then we'll find the bad guys after you defend yourself, but we can't get there quickly enough. So talk to Christians and tell them about this theological journey that you went through, your perspective.
Sure. Well, we have a saying that a gun in the hand is better than a cop on the phone. And so I think that gives you a bit of insight into the way we feel about it here. But the scriptures are very clear. 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 says, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And provision isn't only for food. Provision is also for the security of your family. That's why people put locks on doors. That's why they have security gates and burglar bars and these sorts of things where we live in South Africa, is because we need to protect our families. And if we don't do anything to protect them, then the scripture is saying that we're worse than an unbeliever. In other words, this is a primary responsibility that we have.
Yes. Yes. If good people, if Christians are not going to defend the innocent, that is worse than an unbeliever. To me, I look at it as if someone were to come into my home and they were to start to beat my child in front of me, and I just sat there and say, well, I can't strike them because I'm a Christian. No, I have to defend the innocent because I'm a Christian.
That's right. Exactly. And I wrote a book on this called Shooting Back, and the subtitle is The Right and Duty of Self-Defense. In other words, it's not just a right that you have. You have a duty before God to protect the innocent, and especially those whom he's entrusted to you. And so it's actually a disgrace for Christian men to say that they're not willing to protect the innocent. In fact, when it talks in the scriptures about how a man loves his wife, the idea is that you must love her like Christ loved the church. That means you need to be prepared to die for your wife, not just stand by and watch while she gets raped or murdered by somebody.
Yes.
That's just pure cowardice in the face of the enemy.
Yes, and certainly it's interesting because, we typically think about that as being our immediate family, our loved ones, maybe possibly extend it to our friends. God put the life of 1,000 people in your hands that day.
That's right. And, these things happen around us here in South Africa. Is not the only time I've needed to protect myself and other people. I've also had an attempt at carjacking in which I got into a gunfight in a squatter camp. And so we live very, very stressed lives here in South Africa because of the crime rate. And so we've got to be prepared all the time for these sorts of things.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the gun laws in South Africa. What were the gun laws at the time, and what are they now?
Yeah, the gun laws at the time it was far easier to get a firearm at that time. If I remember correctly, it took me about 10 days to go through the application process, and I was given a license. The license fees in those days was about R2, which is less than 20 cent American cents. And in no time, I could go fetch my firearm at the shop. So we had a licensing process. We now have a new Firearms Control Act, which is far more onerous than the original Arms and Ammunition Act. And this is a terrible piece of legislation. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, if I'm accused and have charges laid for me against me with regards to any misuse of a firearm in South Africa, I need to go to court and try and prove my innocence. I'm considered guilty and need to go prove my innocence.
Wow.
And that there's no other law in South Africa that follows this kind of thinking, except when it comes to firearms. So the communist government in South Africa are neurotic and very concerned about the public owning firearms. And they should be with the terrible things that they're doing in our country.
Yes, absolutely. And we understand here in America that the fundamental purpose of the Second Amendment was a check on the abuse of power. And just having firearms is a check without it ever having to resort to violence. When they know that a massive amount of the public has firearms, that does act as a restraint, just as we saw with the mutual assured destruction doctrine of Russia and America both having nuclear wars. Being armed and having the person who might come after you violently know that you're armed, that is a deterrent not only to crime of individuals, but also to crimes of government. That's why we see, as you're seeing in South Africa with the communist government, it's always the communists who always come after the guns. Of course, that's what we're basically seeing here in America. It's the party of socialism that is relentless on this attack to take away our firearms.
Sure. An armed society is a polite society.
Yes.
And I was doing some filming at Parliament with the commander of the troops that shot up our church, the commander of the terrorists. He actually gave go-ahead for the attack. He was the one that commanded the attack to take place. And he introduced me to a former colleague of his, and these were his words. He says, "There we thought the church was a gun-free zone, but boy, did Charles have a surprise for us."
Yes.
And so it's very clear that the reason they attacked the church, they thought it was a white liberal church and there'd be nobody there armed to stop the carnage from going ahead.
Precisely. And that's why we see the attacks on schools, why we see the attacks on churches. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand, is that you can never eradicate crazy people. You can never eradicate people who hate you because of your race, people who hate you because you're a Christian, for whatever reason. You can't eliminate the crazy people, the violent people. You have to be able to protect yourself. And when they take away firearms with laws, the only people that are going to be disarmed are the law-abiding citizens. The criminals will still be able to find them. We've said this over and over again. Now, you founded an organization there in South Africa, Gun Owners of South Africa. And is that a lobbying education organization there? Sounds like Gun Owners of America here in the United States.
Yes, it's very much. In fact, Larry Pratt, the executive director of Gun Owners of America, came over to South Africa for the launch of Gun Owners of South Africa. And I'm one of the founding members of the organization. And we basically do what your Gun Owners of America is doing back there, and that's to educate the population, fighting for our gun rights, and basically trying to have the Firearms Control Act that I mentioned a few minutes ago, have that scrapped altogether.
And I saw an article, Charles, on Gun Owners of America's site saying that it was an article that Larry Pratt had written that was instrumental in helping you to get over this objection that you had to carrying firearms. As you said, it was a struggle as to whether or not it was an ethical thing to do, and it was that article from Larry Pratt that helped you to work through the issues. Is that correct?
That's right, David. It was a wonderful article you wrote about the biblical principles of self-defense. And in fact, I took the whole article with Larry's permission and put it as a chapter in my book, Shooting Back. And so it's all in there if anybody wants to purchase it. And it made such a difference in my life. And as you've mentioned, the life of at least 1,000 other people. Yes.
You know, it was, as I said in the introduction, you know, David came against Goliath with 5 smooth stones, and you went against these terrorists in a gigantic attack with just 5 rounds and a .38. And I really admire your courage. You're a man that was in the right place. God used you powerfully in that, and I hope that he will continue to use you not only to help people to protect themselves, but I understand you're a missionary still there in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I work through Central Africa and Southern Africa, and the work in Central Africa actually just really backs up my stand for firearms. I work in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which isn't democratic or republic. When you hear that in Africa, you got to know it's communism. And the people are completely